Yeah, so I'm Garland Garris. I have worked between state, local, and federal governments 30 years in promoting technology. And for the last 5 years, I've worked for Accenture Federal Services, and we've worked initially in quantum security, moving into quantum computing. We've done a lot of work with the energy sector. We've done a lot of work with the national labs. And we're, of course, looking at what the U.S. federal government is doing, and then contrasting that with being competitive with really China, but other nation states which are making progress in some instances, in many instances, more than we are. So I want to talk about that today, and we'll hit a few different topics. Let's see if I can figure this thing out. All right. So initially, I want to talk about how I think expectations every year are really surpassing metrics we set for the next year. That's been pretty consistent. And then talk about government's role. And so from that, I want to talk about what the United States is doing or has done, and then contrast that with how it compares to China, really. And then talk about hype a little bit. There is a lot of that. From a geopolitical sense, I think it's almost required for nations to promote themselves. And then some practical quantum computing examples where we've actually been able to use hybrid quantum systems to do some things today. And then really circle back around to where China is in communication, where I think there's a lot of work for us to catch up. So first, okay, lesson learned here. This wonderful image here I generated with AI. You'll see some mistakes on it. So double check your AI work. But the points are pretty valid, and there's been a significant progress over the last few years, again, more than we anticipated. And it wasn't until just a few years ago, really, that the first commercial quantum computer was available from D-Wave. And then from that, you ended up seeing this race between IBM, Google, China, and the term quantum supremacy, where nations are claiming to do things faster than others. And it's just been a staggering rate of increase, which I've at least been blown away by. So we've seen faster than expected scaling, computers beating our expectations there. There's new technologies in quantum computing available now, so you don't have to invest $20 or $30 million in a superconducting quantum computer. You have quantum systems that operate at room temperature, and Professor Davis that was up here before, he mentioned several of those modalities, and that has made it more approachable for federal agencies who don't have huge budgets. So there's been more involvement there for neutral atom systems, silicon spin, light-based systems, which is one of the things we're going to talk about. And of course, these operate at room temperature, so you don't have these environmental constraints that you do with superconducting systems. So that's moved things forward. Error correcting code has gotten much better. And initially, we were introducing more complexity and more noise than we were correcting. So I think we've turned the curve there. So now we're seeing advances in gate-based systems that we hadn't seen before. Software SDKs, so you've got Qiskit for IBM and others that have come a long way. Ocean's SDK for D-Wave, they've gotten a lot easier to use. And then for some systems, Python is your interface. So if you have data scientists, you don't even have to learn a new SDK. You could just code straight in Python. So that's made it more approachable. You can access a quantum computer from the cloud, anyone here, for free, actually, and a lot of vendors without investing a lot of money. And there is starting to be a convergence between AI and quantum, and I think in complementary ways. So you can train models using quantum computers that are a lot more efficient than what you see in classical systems. Okay, this is a really old map that you guys have probably seen. The reason I use this when this is from 2022 is because I trust the numbers on it more than I do some of the more current ones. But if you see, if you contrast, the U.S. is spending a little more than $1 billion in quantum. Now that comes from the National Quantum Initiatives Act. Most of that, I think pretty much all of that, went to DOE, Director of Science, and it's really for physics research. And China is spending $15 million, a lot more than we are. However, I want to point out one difference there. In China, there's no daylight between the private sector and public sector. So in America, it's not like that. So even though you see $1.2 billion from the United States, Microsoft is investing, D-Wave is investing, all these other vendors we have downstairs. So there is a lot of investment coming in the West. It's just not reflected in the fact that the government is investing it. So if you put those together, I think that we're pretty competitive. But still, I think China still has an edge from a financial perspective. Recent number from McKinsey, we believe we're going to be at $97 billion in 2035. So that's certainly increasing a lot. So let's talk about the United States. A lot of what we've seen here from a security perspective has been focused on helping federal agencies prepare for the eventual development of a cryptographically relevant quantum computer. So you saw NSM-8, NSM-10, M2302. What was House Bill 7535 became the Quantum Computing Preparedness Act. And all of those are focused on really forcing agencies to, one, create an inventory of what they have so that they have awareness of the cryptography that's in flight on their networks, and then move them to create a strategy for eventual migration to PQC. And I think everybody would agree that's a reasonable role for government to play, at least in the United States. Also, NSA released what's called the CNSA Suite 2.0, which approved the PQC algorithms we saw come from NIST. And NIST, of course, had this competition that ran many years. We finally arrived to PQC algorithms that are safe and a good replacement for what we have been using for really 4 decades. All of these are really reasonable things for a government to do, but I want to contrast that again with countries like China. Now, in the United States, almost all of the industrial control systems are owned by private companies. I'll give you an example, Tennessee Valley Authority, for example. The government can put out policies for federal agencies to force them to keep an inventory, come up with plans for migration, but when it comes to a lot of the operators, it's a collaborative. And a lot of these private sector companies, they're not going to be given funding by the government. They can be given tax incentives, but it still requires investment on their part. And these companies still have to take care of cyber primitives as well. So that's a difference between countries like China, which for their industrial control systems, those are still considered government entities. So in the West, it's a little more of a negotiation and a collaborative than it is a forced, a matter of something being forced. So that's a big distinction. And okay, again, showing my AI prowess, I generated that image right there. Very proud of it. Maybe a little too aggressive. But really, we are in a game of chess with China to a certain extent, and you'll see numbers come out where China's latest version quantum computer. I'm going to butcher this name, Carl. You might have to help me out here. Can't do it. Anyway, 1 quadrillion times faster than the world's fastest supercomputer. Now that sounds impressive. Until you consider that what it's actually doing is solving a problem called a random circuit sampling problem. Shows you how fast your computer is, does absolutely nothing useful, right? And that's great to highlight advances in quantum computing. If you want to contrast where China is versus the United States, it's a good metric, I suppose. However, there is definitely a lot of hype going on here. A good example is a 3rd-generation quantum computer in China. The assertion is made that it completed over 38,000 quantum computing tasks for more than 26 million users. Now, 26 million users accessing a computer that can do nothing useful. I don't know. I'm not sure if I buy that one. I think there's definitely a lot of geopolitical positioning going on here. There's progress that's being made there, but there's also a little bit of positioning there just to keep the money flowing and also to make the country look better. So I want to step back and talk about some practical things that you can do with quantum computers. And this one specifically, if you go downstairs, there's a vendor we've been using, which is called QCI. We have one of their hybrid systems in our lab. And this is a screenshot from one of the use cases we've developed. So this is a machine learning example focused on classification. And classification in data science can be performed with supervised learning and to categorize data into different classes. And the idea is to perform binary classification and use a meta technique called boosting. Boosting is meant to train classifiers that utilize weighted combinations of weak classifiers such that you end up with strong classifiers. XGBoost, it's the name of a specific function is more efficient with smaller data sets. When you get up to about 50,000 records, then the hybrid quantum computer that we're using is much more efficient, and it's just able to scale to larger numbers. So the largest example we have in our lab is training about 4 million records, and it does it in a much more efficient way. So that's an example of something that can be done today that is useful. So I'm going to go on to another example here. Something you'll see in the news every day is, especially in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, is the use of drones. So if you're using automation for these, one of the things you have to consider is risk, not just to the drone itself, but to humans as you're flying over certain areas. So planned and unmanned aerial system flights between 2 points requires that you analyze risk to find the best path to take. And the risk involved in a particular path also includes the ability for the drone to complete its mission. And we'll refer to the model that only answers the decision question without time as LR, or lowest risk. The second model, which ensures timelines, will be referred to as LRTC, which is lowest risk time constraint. The simpler model, LR, can be solved using an existing polynomial algorithm on a classical computer. You can do this really easy. However, the LRTC question, it adds the time constraint. This puts this in the NP hard or otherwise intractable universe, and you can't do that with a classical system. This is something that we've been able to do with our hybrid system, and we've demoed for several military clients. So those are a couple of examples where we can do practical things now and use cases that we're continuing to develop, but these are a couple that have been demoed to different government clients and been received pretty well. And the final thing I wanted to discuss is communications. This is something where I'm afraid China has really invested earlier than we have, and they have a significant lead on us from a capability perspective. We are investing now, but we are definitely playing catch up. So entanglement-based communications uses properties that even Einstein could not completely understand. He called it, spooky action at a distance. Love that. And in fact, a few years ago, there were 3 physicists who were awarded the Nobel Prize for proving something could not be explained, because the idea was that hidden variables were somehow in play, and that was disproven. So maybe the first time in history a Nobel Prize was awarded for proving you can't understand something, but I digress. So quantum mechanics, in the context of satellite communications, relies on specifically entanglement, which again is something that we understand how it works, but not why it works the way it does. Key generation and transmission, satellite generates a pair of entangled photons and sends them to ground stations. The polarization of these photons creates a secret key and a sequence of random numbers used for encryption. Now, because of the way quantum physics works, if you eavesdrop on this communication, it's going to change the quantum state, and therefore you know that key is not secure. And this is something that China did successfully in 2022. Now, talking about the commitment to investment, Accenture in April will launch our first CubeSat, Well, we'll be doing our first mission, which is really to do secure quantum communication and generating a QRNG from space. When we get to our third mission, which is a couple years out, we hope to replicate this. This is not something that's being funded by the federal government. It's something that our company is doing because we know it's important to be competitive with China. So, all right. And I think I'm to the end there, and I'm getting the hook anyway. So thank you for your time.